Welcome to the 2017 Texas Education Agency Writing Portfolio Rubric Training. The purpose of this training is to provide a detailed overview of how to apply the Writing Portfolio Rubric. We'll begin by taking a look at the makeup of the Writing Portfolio. Then, we'll examine the contents of the portfolio scoring rubric, including an overview of the score points in the rubric categories. Next, we'll look at a framework for evaluating the portfolio and then move into an in-depth review of the rubric categories. After that, we'll provide a strategy for applying the rubric to portfolios and go over an example of the process. The writing portfolio consists of 4 student responses. Time sample 1 is written at the beginning of the school year under the time constraint of 1 class period. Students do not do any work on the time sample until that day in class. Within 1 class period, they have to choose a prompt and produce a final copy. For the time samples, the portfolio will only contain evidence of the final copy. Process sample 1 is written during the course of the school year in the normal classroom environment. The portfolio should contain evidence of the writing process the students followed and include a final copy. Process sample 2 is written later in the school year than process sample 1, but under the same conditions. It too should include artifacts of the writing process in a final copy. Time sample 2 is similar to time sample 1, except it occurs at the end of the school year. These are the 4 examples of student work that make up the writing portfolio. The portfolio scoring rubric is designed to evaluate a student's overall portfolio. The rubric has elements of holistic and analytic rubrics. The 4 score points are located at the top of the rubric. These score points are applicable to all categories and provide the distinguishing language for the different score points. Score point 4 exceeds expectations, score point 3 meets expectations, score point 2 developing towards expectations, and score point 1 substantially below expectations. There are 7 categories on the rubric. Each of the categories has expectations, evidence, and examples. The examples are located next to the categories. The 7 categories are planning, drafting, revising, editing, publishing, and attention to feedback, expressing ideas, organization and structure, and use of language and conventions. It's important to note that the process samples will factor in all scoring categories, whereas the time samples will only factor into the last 3 categories. A framework for understanding the portfolio and rubric. It's important to remember that the portfolio represents an entire year of a student's work. The body of work should be the ultimate consideration in the scores that are given. Those scores will be derived from the individual samples and based on the scoring categories, but the portfolio as a whole is the most important artifact. Now we'll take an in-depth look at the scoring categories. As a reminder, the process samples will factor in all scoring categories because we have final copies and evidence of the writing process. For the time samples, we only have evidence of the final copy, and so they will only factor into the last 3 categories. First, we'll take a look at the planning category. In the planning category, students are expected to use a range of strategies to generate ideas that are appropriate to the task, topic, or genre. Evidence could include webs, graphic organizers, journals, or any other planning strategy a student might use. Planning could look very different across students. For one student, a web might work best, but for another, it might be a free write. Different teachers might also ask their students to try a specific planning strategy. Either way, the focus is simply on how well the student planned his or her writing. Some guided questions to lead you in your evaluation of the planning category are, from the evidence, Was the student clearly able to put their thoughts and ideas down on paper? And did the thoughts and ideas assist the student in developing a draft? Now we'll look at the drafting category. In the drafting category, students are expected to take ideas from their planning activities and categorize, organize, and/or develop them into an appropriate draft. Evidence should show that the ideas from the planning stage are developed into a more coherent written format by producing an expanded outline, an expanded web, expanded graphic organizer, or a first draft. Similar to planning, drafting might look a little different for each student or class. Some guiding questions to help you when evaluating the drafting category are: from the evidence, was the student able to take the ideas from planning and grow them into a first draft of a written piece? Again, this could look different for every student. Did the student develop his or her thoughts for the task, topic, or genre assigned? Now we'll take a look at the revising category. In the revising category, students are expected to revise their drafts so that they can clarify the meaning appropriate to the task, topic, or genre. The evidence should demonstrate that the ideas from the first draft or drafts are further developed for coherence, organization, sentence structure, transitions, and/or the use of language is appropriate to the task, topic, or genre. It's important to remember that the evidence could look different for each individual student. The focus of this category is the continuation of idea and thought development. Did the student take the ideas from the first draft and develop them further to add to the writing? Did the student continue the improvement and development in his or her writing through revising their work? Now we'll take a look at the editing, publishing, and attention to feedback category. In this category, we're looking at how the student edits their drafts for appropriate grammar, mechanics, or spelling to the task, topic, or genre, and incorporates feedback from peers and/or teachers. Evidence demonstrates that revisions have been made and/or suggestions from peers, self, and/or teachers have been incorporated. Evidence here could include multiple copies of a full piece of writing with markup for grammar, or a final, clean publication ready copy of the written piece appropriate to the task, topic, or genre. The focus of this category is taking the writing from draft to final copy. Did the student edit his or her work for grade appropriate grammar, spelling, and/or mechanics? Did the student pay attention to the feedback they received from classmates to bring their writing into a publication-ready format? Now we'll take a look at the Expressing Ideas category. This category measures how effective students communicate and express themselves through a variety of writing genres. Evidence should demonstrate that the writing has specific, well-chosen, and relevant details. The focus for this category is analyzing the 4 samples for idea expression across the variety of grade level appropriate genres. From the evidence, was the student able to communicate his or her thoughts and ideas through a variety of written genres? Now we'll take a look at the organization category. In the organization and structure category, students are expected to effectively express their thoughts and ideas through texts that are organized, structured, and focused. Evidence should demonstrate a strong focus, meaningful transitions, idea to idea, sentence to sentence, and paragraph to paragraph connections. Across the 4 samples, is there evidence that the student effectively structured and organized his or her ideas in the composed text? From the evidence, can you determine that the student was able to keep his or her focus in their written pieces? From the evidence, can you see the student effectively transitioning between thoughts and ideas in their written pieces? Now we'll take a look at the use of language in conventions category. In this category, we're evaluating how well a student expresses his or her ideas through composed texts that effectively exhibit use of language, word choice, sentence structure, voice, and conventions. Evidence should demonstrate language and word choice that are purposeful, precise, and enhance the writing. In addition, we want to look at how a student is able to express themselves through an authentic voice. From the evidence in the four pieces, are you able to ascertain that the student demonstrated purposeful word choice and language that enhanced his or her writing? Does the student's voice come through? Does the student use appropriate written conventions? Now we'll take a look at a scoring strategy for evaluating each of the portfolios. This is called the ABC scoring strategy. The A is for it aligns to the rubric. The scoring a portfolio can be done efficiently and effectively by using a process that aligns with the setup and organization of the rubric. The portfolio rubric begins with the writing process categories that only apply to the process samples. This would be a good place to start. The B is for the big picture. Portfolios are designed to show the entire scope of a student's work. This should always remain the focus during scoring. Always keep in mind the entire body of work for a student when scoring the individual categories. The C is for consider context. Materials in a portfolio are created within different contexts. These have to be considered when scoring. Time samples were written during one class period. They won't reflect the quality of the process samples, which were written through classroom instruction and with guidance. Different teaching strategies could also show up in the portfolio and should be recognized as acceptable. Here again is the framework for understanding the portfolio. We want to remember that the portfolio as a whole is the most important consideration. Here's how we apply the ABC strategy. This is an example of all the artifacts that might appear in a student's portfolio. We have time sample 1, a few documents for process sample 1, and then the process sample 1 final. Then we have a few documents from pre-writing and planning for process sample 2, and then process sample 2 final. Lastly, we have time sample 2. Using the ABC strategy, we'll begin by looking over the entire portfolio. That's the B for big picture. Then we'll focus on the process samples. This is the A for aligns to the rubric. Since the process samples factor into the first categories, that's a logical place to start. Begin by taking a look at all of the documents for process sample 1. Look over the pre-writing and planning and drafting and revising and editing and the final copy. Then take a look at all of the process sample 2 documents, the pre-writing and the planning, the writing process, and the final copy. Then score for the writing process categories that only apply to the process samples. Once you've done that, read time sample 1 and time sample 2. Then review process sample 1 and process sample 2 final responses only. Once you've done that, you can score for the last 3 categories based on all 4 responses. The ABC strategy aligns with the portfolio framework. It allows us to look at the entire portfolio through the individual samples through the lens of the scoring categories.